Opposing Gloves here, and this is another video in the FL12 effects series, and we're going to be looking today at the Fruity Squeeze. This is amazing for lo-fi stuff, like super great. So let me play for you just a little demo. It gets really weird. Let's talk about what's going on, and then you'll get a whole bunch more ideas as you go. Like, I've gotten so many different textures out of this. Like, it's pretty crazy what this can do. Definitely worth throwing in your mixer chain on a bass or something you just want to sound lo-fi. So Fruity Squeeze, it's like an extreme bit depth, bit cruncher is essentially what it is. So we have a few options here to start off. So I'm going to turn off most of these options and set things back to where their default is and call that good. You saw me touch this knob. I probably shouldn't have touched it while I was moving, but I was just kind of turning crap. So let's see what we got going on here. So the first thing you need to understand is what bit depth is. If you don't know what that is, go watch my video in the DSP series on bit depth. I have one on sample rate. They're both pretty important for this. So you're going to need to understand sample rate and bit depth. So now that you've gone and watched those, or you already have a good understanding of what that is, the first thing we have here is called Square Eyes. Square Eyes, essentially what this lets you do is it lets you take the bits and push them to their minimum and maximum value. So I have a saw wave right here by default, and as I turn on Square Eyes, now Square Eyes, it changes the bit depth. So it's not necessarily a square wave. What it does is it removes levels of bit depths. And I only have like 8 bits, so you can only have 8 volume levels. This should be a familiar concept from the bit depth video. So you see, we only have so many layers now. So if we play some higher notes and we really crunch it. So that's your already you've got your basic bit cruncher thing. So let's come down here to the lower notes. It sounds quite interesting. There's already so few samples. There's actually a lot more samples on a low note. So it's kind of interesting what it does to low notes versus high notes. That's something I did not talk about in that video, but you got to think about it. If you're sampling rate, this means that this has way more samples, way more levels of bit depth for this particular frequency than a higher frequency, which may only have like 2. So it will bit crunching will have way different effects on a low frequency note than it will on a high frequency note, which is one of the reasons why it tends to sound, in my opinion, better on it. So I'm going to leave this off now. So we come over here, we have this puncher. This is where things get pretty wild. So over here, they have a lot of readouts for numbers. So first you have preserve. What preserve is, so if I turn this up, nothing's happening right now. That's because I'm not processing anything yet. So first we need to look at impact and amount. So this takes the numbers of samples in your current sample rate session, whatever the sample rate is of your session right now. So mine's at 44.1. And so I have up to 44.1 samples. So as you can see, I could choose in between here. And what impact does is, so I play a note, right? And we have all these samples coming across here. What it's going to do is it's going to take a chunk of this, calculate the average level of volume, the nominal level, and it's going to put it at that level. And it will do that. And so let's just show you. So, and this is the number of samples that it takes to calculate that, and how often also it gets affected. So every 9 samples, I'll have some sort of quantized change. So because these 9 samples are different levels, so they'll have a different average than these 9 levels over here, and so on and so forth. So let's just turn that on. You see at first with like every 1 sample, every single sample is like remap. So you get really high frequency content. As you bring it down, you're essentially choosing a frequency because every 9 samples you get a new one. So you're essentially choosing an additional frequency to enter into your signal, but it's like merged in a way with the original that it's like this weird and mixed up thing. And you see as the higher our sample rate gets, the less noticeable this effect really becomes. So that's what impact does. So it calculates that average. If you do not want to use the average, let's say you like this, but you want to change the level on your own, you can go to amount and you can set the amount. So instead of taking the average, it will go by this amount that you set. So let's say you've on it 33%. So you can do some pretty interesting things. 100% is essentially the amount does not exist. So it's essentially returning it to its original state. And it's really important because you can get so many textures out of this, just this idea right here. Now, preserve this gets mixed up with impact. It says it gets interleaved. So what comes out of the Fruity Squeeze plugin actually gets interleaved, these two. And this creates a huge number of like an outrageous number of textures. So preserve is the number of samples working on the similar idea of impact that are not affected by impact. So what happens is preserve will say every 13 samples, these aren't affected. Every 13 samples, these aren't affected. But then impact saying, but every 9 samples, I'm quantizing here and here and here. And you get these really out there bit quantization settings, like this outrageous control over it. So you see, and if we turn this all the way on, what will happen is we can go up to 44.1, so the full sample rate. Then you'd say, oh, there's no change. Well, instead of it doing that, because you could just, turn the plugin off or turn the amount off, and you could do any number of things to turn it off. So instead of doing that, what they did was this will go for 1 second. It'll be preserved, so nothing will happen. And then all of a sudden, it will feel the full brute of impact, the impact thing. So it'll feel the full brute of the requantization of whatever this setting is. And then it will go back to being preserved for 1 second, and every other second, it will switch off. If we turn on our filter here, sometimes this is extraordinarily noticeable. Sometimes it is not. You can see our high frequency, this bit depth introduces frequencies at rates. That's one of the insanely powerful things, is the ability to choose the sample you're on. That's like nuts. And you can deliberately add in high frequency content. It's pretty wild. We're going to talk about what this filter module does in a second. And so next up, we have this relation. And so this relation just sets a ratio between the preserve and impact, so that you don't have that you might want to automate these individually. But you could set up a relation where it's like impact, preserve. You could go double, half, or you could just have them linked together. So as they move together, you could have this one move so that this is always double whatever this value is. And this one could be half of whatever this value is. So that's all relation does, which is why I was like, I don't know why I was touching this knob. And so that's what these buttons do. But it gets really fun, and this preserve becomes even more noticeable, even though it's already pretty noticeable what it's doing right now, when you turn on your filter. So if we turn our filter on, go watch my filter basics video if you have no idea what these filters are, and the EQ2 video will probably be a good start too. So, by the way, you can automate all these things, which is like, well, man. So if you right click, you actually don't get a list, which is a bit of a bummer. So you have to click and scroll, but you have a band pass, peak, notch, all these things, and you can introduce this filter into your signal. You can give it a resonance and you can select the frequency, and you can set it to be pre, so before it gets sent through the puncher section, it will be filtered. And then you can set it to post. Really awesome stuff. And then you can send and then you have the resonance. So the resonance makes a big deal. I tend to keep it on pre. And then you have mix. So this is completely affected signal. This is 100% dry, so a completely unaffected signal. So it's as if this isn't even here. You can automate this on and off. And you also have gain. So this is the final gain that comes out. You can actually turn it down. So it could be considered an attenuator, even though it says gain. Because I'm hitting notes and nothing is coming out. But as I turn it on, there it is. There's our signal. This could be very necessary if you are dealing, if it's like clipping or not the level you want, all that stuff. Because turning down the fader in some plugins will adjust what's coming in. I don't think it'll matter too much with this plugin, but in some plugins that's a deal. So you're going to want to use the gain knob in the plugin to maintain the textural change you are doing. Just simply moving a fader can sometimes change the processing. This is a remapping amplitude though, so I don't think it should make a difference. In things that use a threshold though, it makes a big difference. And so let's go to something like a peak filter. Let's go to a band pass filter. I like, oh, you know what? Amount was probably screwing me over with the preserve. So let's turn. As you can see, like I said, it's kind of insane what you can do. Let's go to a low pass. And you see we get this clipping. 1 second, one. So there's the 1 second thing I was talking about. It was the amount, because I'm overriding what impact does, which is why it wasn't working. So anyways. Let's make a sound and use this as our main sound source. Now I have things all over the map right now, which is fine. I'm going to open up Harmor. I do have a whole series on how to do whatever I'm about to do in Harmor. So you could let's go to let's do this even lower. There we go. You got to find a good ratio with something like this because it's relative to the frequency range you're going to be moving in. Just really interesting things you can do. Don't want to touch that. Let's put it down. And by the way, you can send audio through this too. And we'll automate the filter. But automating the amount could be interesting too. So sorry, I could mess with this all day and find something that I really like. I could think of a million things to record off this too and just create this really sort of glitchy thing. And this thing isn't even that grimy yet. This is just a saw tone, like with a bit of distortion. Imagine adding some resonance in there. And just doing all manner of madness. We could even go in here and randomize. So yeah, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments, subscribe, and have a blessed day.
Opposing blows. Reversing.